Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Has everyone had a good time so far? Any issues outside of the blue screen stuff there? Awesome. So I'm going to talk a little about, probably spend about 30 minutes here talking about some of the stuff that I do security-wise, and then open the floor for any kind of questions that you might have. A little bit of background. I'm going to put a quick little presentation here to do. So let me just turn it on. A little bit about me. I've been working at eBacon now for about 11 years. I've been primarily in a development role at the company, but as a developer, security has always been a main focus of mine. And having to make sure that our products are secure. Since we've built our product from the ground up, I've had to kind of identify security threats, neutralize those security threats, and then build things into our application that made sure that we weren't going to let all our data or private information get leaked all over the place. For some context, what is eBacon? So we've been around for now this year about 17 years. We do payroll, time and attendance, HR, 401k benefits, meaning like health insurance and things like that, for a variety of different companies. But our main focus with our new product line is construction companies. There's a lot of laws that customers have to comply with, called prevailing wage laws. And if you're in that industry, or if you've ever heard of those things, or if you've ever had to work with them, you might have actually realized how much of a pain those are for companies to deal with. And our system automates a lot of that. It's not really important to get into too much of the details on that side unless someone has questions later on. But it is interesting because there's a lot of unique privacy concerns and security issues that we have to deal with. Being a payroll company, we have, actually, let me jump down here. Being a payroll company, we have a lot of interesting privacy and security concerns. We have to, let's chat, make sure I'm not missing anything here. In case someone's trying to do okay, cool, thank you. Being a payroll company, we have a lot of interesting privacy and security concerns. We do work in almost every single state. So we're always having to keep up to date on the changes in the laws and stuff like that. So even as like a developer on the team, I'm having to understand the privacy changes. As a good example, we released a new feature, or we're releasing a new feature right now for our application, for our mobile app. And that application allows us to track employees whenever they clock in. So once you clock into our app, then we can track you all day long. We get your consent beforehand, but most companies that require this require their employees to be tracked all day. And just releasing that feature, while it was relatively easy from a technical perspective, opened up a heck of a lot more questions about privacy than it did about anything else. And we've avoided the conversation for a very long time, even though we've had a lot of demand for the product, because the privacy concerns were so high, because we had to ask ourselves, do we really want the information of somebody tracked every single time they move? And is that even something that philosophically we agree with? And what is the actual demand on the market that requires that information, requires it to happen? And so from our perspective, we had to look at not only what's the security concern of tracking people, how do we have to develop around that information, but then what are the laws of the different states? Since we do a lot of work in California, that brought up a lot of questions on the California side, which sometimes sits on our team to research as developers and security side. So more context on that, we're a small company. We have currently have like 80 employees. So in a smaller company, you have a lot more work to do. You have a lot more work to do, like as a group, to look at things. Like you don't have like a whole team of 25 security people to work with. You have to do a lot more work with. On your own side, you have to take up more of those kind of banners yourselves. Our development team does a lot of training with security, does some certifications with security, so that they can be aware of what's going on as they're actually developing stuff. it's definitely a little bit different from what I've heard from other presentations where they have like whole sub departments of security teams members on their team. Some other things though that kind of make it unique is that when you look at a lot of the laws, like the California privacy laws, and you look at some of these other privacy laws that are coming out, Nevada passed one, California has them. There's some on the East Coast that are also kind of prevalent, like New York. They never really contemplate payroll companies, which is what we are. They don't really contemplate the fact that an employee has to give up all their data to their employer and has to have all that data stored inside of the system. And it makes it very awkward for us. And there still hasn't been guidelines for a lot of that. As a good example, like California has a right to delete your information, right? And that, completely has no contemplation, or there's like a very weird, awkward part in there that says, well, unless like someone really needs it or something like that. And for payroll processing purposes, you need stuff like social security number, address, phone number, email address. You need all of that information to actually process payroll and send stuff to the state on their behalf. And employees sometimes ask for that information to be deleted, but we have to kind of play a kind of a middle ground because we really can't do it because it's the employer's decision. And so we've always been left in kind of like a weird spot, trying to interpret like what the actual facts are on the ground when it comes to how do we handle privacy and security in our platform, especially when it comes to like these newer laws that are coming out. So it's something that we're constantly jumping through hoops on. But then the other threats that emerge in our industry, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the kind of MyPayroll HR scandal. The MyPayroll HR scandal that happened, I think it was like last year before, where a company out of somewhere northeast, I think it was Massachusetts, started like sending a lot of payroll transfers and not kind of, they sent out like a bunch of money because they were just like floating money in between the system a little bit to try to show that they had more money in their bank accounts. But in doing so, they ended up not paying tens of thousands of people because the bank blocked them. But there's threats like that happen all the time. As a payroll company, we transfer billions of dollars a year in payroll monies to like tens of thousands of people. And so we're always having to kind of deal with the threats that are inherent inside of moving money between people and having to deal with the privacy concerns there. There was a question on, let me just answer that right now. It has the GDPR. Is GDPR, just real fast, that's the European one, or is that the California one? Is that the California one was called something else?
That's the European one.
European one, okay.
Yeah, it's European, but California and a lot of the states have done quite a bit of it in the payroll space. And I was just curious, as far as from security's perspective, how that would work. So.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So from the GDPR, like we have like 2 people in our system that are in Europe. And we've kind of taken an attitude of that, of like, we don't advertise in Europe, we don't sell in Europe, we don't do anything in Europe. And honestly, those 2 people that are in Europe, to us, are more of a fluke than anything else. And if push ever came to shove, we would, we haven't been able to come up with a strategy to say, we're going to go through a lot more compliance for 2 people out of, tens of thousands of other people. So GDPR hasn't really affected us that much. Now, let me go to the California side. Since we do a lot of business in California, the major affections on that side have been more about policy than anything else. Like security-wise, we'd already been kind of taking the right steps that we had to take. But, we had to put together new privacy policies. We had to ensure that we were, kind of like being a little bit more upfront on where data is being stored and stuff like that. But even on the payroll side, like it's like I've read through the whole California thing, and it's not super explicit on that side on like exactly how a payroll company has to operate with how how us as the payroll company interacts with the employee and employer relationship in that instance, because the employee is kind of giving the information to the employer, but it's being stored in a third party, but the employer needs it and we need to file taxes. So it's kind of a weird spot for us to be in, as I kind of mentioned earlier. So I've done a little bit of research and reading into it and made sure that our platform is compliant with the requirements. But I will say that from a pure business perspective, my worry was that when the California law came out, that we'd have just a ton of weird data requests or a ton of issues that we'd have to have. And I think a lot of people had the same concern. But literally to this date, I think it's been 2 years since it's come out, we've had one person email us and say, I want my information deleted. And we said, okay, well, we'll keep kind of like a Jane Doe of you in the system so that your employer can reference back to that record. But we'll get rid of any other private information. But no one's ever asked for the information to be ported to any other system. And that's because mostly that's information that the employer the employer has. That's like payroll data and time and attendance data and stuff like that. And the employer can already pull that information. And that privacy security stuff doesn't really apply to that level, right? That applies more to the individual consumer that applies more to the consumer in California, not necessarily to the company holding the data on behalf of the consumer. Does that make sense? It's a really weird, awkward spot that it puts us in. Did you have any follow-up on questions on that? I'm sorry. Cool. So to kind of continue, one thing I wanted to go over during this conversation is just since I'm kind of more from the development side, I want to spend a few minutes talking about working with developers from a security perspective. What does it take to work with a development team, and what's that look like on our team today? Apologies, I'm going to jump back and forth with Rich in chat. Cool, thank you. So working with developers. So, and I can't see everybody here. Has anyone ever worked with a development team from a security perspective before? Seen a lot of no's. Excellent. So hopefully this will be newer information. So let me talk a little bit about how code gets into the hands of customers. So if you look at a development team, there's a handful of different ways that software gets built, software gets into people's hands. The most prevalent model in smaller and medium size, or now being more large size companies, is the concept of agile development. Agile development is a methodology that says effectively, let's get the smallest product that's the most valuable, kind of the minimum viable product into the hands of our customers as quick as possible, and then iterate on that design, and then move quickly so that we're not waiting around for software to be built. A lot of the big companies today use this methodology, or a lot of companies today use this methodology because it's gone away from the concept of let's write a bunch of requirements and then let's spend 2 years building something and then let's release something, and then hopefully that's what the customers actually want. So now you see a lot of quick development, you see a lot of quick releases. As an example, on our team, we're probably putting out about 100 different releases a month. We're at the team of 12. So there's no longer a cycle of, well, wait 3 months, wait 4 months, and there's going to be a new update. It's quite more incremental, quick incremental changes. The reason why I want to bring this up, though, is that when you think about that from a security perspective, and you think about that from securing a platform, you've probably already had a heart attack of saying, how the heck do I maintain and watch 100 different changes a month in the system that's supposed to be secure, right? And it's also important to see that in the team, in a smaller team, if you're working with a smaller development team, if you're just working with a smaller company, a lot of that responsibility will fall on the plate of a security team member or someone in the cybersecurity realm. And knowing that those changes can happen very quickly and that development can kind of happen quickly, you have to kind of understand that it's important to be involved in that development process early on. If you read through the Agile Manifesto, which was a document put together 20 or so years ago that talks about how to move a lot faster development, or if you read a lot about Agile, you read a lot about the process. Just now, I would say it has been very common. You're seeing a concept of actually putting security into the conversation. If you talk to a lot of developers, they don't know anything about security. It's kind of unfortunate. They don't, and you would think they would, and I'm going to get to misconceptions a little later, but they really don't. There's a lot about testing and validation, stuff like that, but there's not a lot about actually testing stuff. So why do you need to connect? Why does development and security really need to connect to each other? The first thing is understanding risks and emerging threats together. One of the things that we do as a team is, like on the Colonial Pipeline, breach that happened recently. We sat down as a team, read through a lot of the analysis of like why this thing happened, and then try to identify, is there anything we can do in our product to make our customers safer? Is there anything we can do from our networks to keep our employees safer? And is there anything that from our system we can do better? And it helps to have developers in that conversation on the team, because like, as an example, like if I recall correctly, one of the threats that happened was that one of the passwords were compromised from a phishing attack or something like that. But then that allowed someone to get into the VPN and pretty much run amok inside the system. And where we kind of sat and took a look at that was saying, is there anything we can implement on our side to be better at maintaining passwords and keeping passwords secure? And one of the things that spawned off was, and of course, that's not something that's like happened, we're not just like saying that now, right? It's not like we've been in business for 15 years and saying, how do we keep passwords secure now? But it made us kind of take a second look at stuff, right? And say, okay, so this is how the path happened. What can we implement on our side to kind of make sure that this doesn't happen on our side? Which has led to some kind of unique ideas for how we can start testing passwords better, how we can implement new technology on our Active Directory to verify passwords that are not compromised and that kind of stuff. So just sitting down with a development team, or even sending them like a kind of an after action report is a big deal on like the common things that are going out there on the market. Figuring out ways to log and identify issues. So logging is like probably one of the magic bullets that people don't consider inside of platforms. I'm going to touch base on that a little bit more. Educating, and then being proactive. So the last thing I want to touch base on is being proactive. A lot of companies that you see out there are very reactive on their security. When a threat actually happens on a network, they finally say, okay, we're going to really put the money into this thing to make sure this doesn't happen again. And it's not the best model to have as a business. And anytime that you're working in security, I think the best mindset is to be proactive. And if you don't have team members who are proactive, you're kind of you're in a really terrible spot, because if you're just being reactive to things, or if you just have a team that's very focused around forensics or trying to find out why things happen and that kind of stuff, you're not defending your application or your system as you need to. So that's why you got to connect. You got to connect on those kind of 4 points. I'm going to talk a little bit later on like how on the bottom, but one thing I want to get to also though, here's misconception. So I think a lot of people think developers are hackers, and that's why I wanted to show the fun picture of the best hacking movie ever made, which everyone's probably seen. But most developers are not hackers. Like they might have started younger, trying to get into things, but they really don't have a deep knowledge of security. I've got people on my team that have been in the industry for 15, 20 years. And, when we start talking about security, they're like, I've never even thought about that, right? And it's from a perspective that's scary, because when you really talk about developers, you have like three different kind of levels or like directions developers come out of. One is you have the self-taught developer, much like myself. I went to school, I got a degree in marketing. I have been programming since I was 12 years old. So like I've just learned everything along the way. And my security knowledge is only as good as one, my interest, and two, the training my company gives me. And there's a lot of self-taught developers out there. If you talk to a lot of developers, they've jumped into this industry because it's a very interesting industry, but they don't necessarily need to go to school for it. So that's kind of one element of it. The second thing is that you have people who are coming out of boot camps. There are a lot of, especially front-end developers who work on JavaScript or the kind of what you see in your web browser that are coming out of boot camps. And these boot camps are 13 weeks, sometimes 6 months. And the security training on them is pretty negligible, probably nothing at a lot of these boot camps because they're so focused on getting the students out to train on a very specific web stack that they're not that interested in going into realms that don't pertain to them. So they don't really have that deep security knowledge. And then the other kind of type of developer I always see is more of like like they went to school for computer science and stuff. And even there, like the colleges haven't really kept up that much on, really, really being truly training security at a deep level that you need to know about when you build your applications out. So it's really important in those context, on all those contexts, to be working with your teams and training them. And even though everyone on this chat has probably already heard of the OWASP standards, a lot of developers haven't. And even though they're really easy to implement and easy to test for, they're not testing for it. I can't tell you how many applications I've gone into and basic security doesn't exist. I was on a call with a customer once, and it was actually, I was a call with a customer, and we were talking to another company about integrating between our platforms. And this was a pretty big third-party platform. And I asked the customer on the call with the rep to just change the ID number in the header. We changed it. They got to their, they got right to the other customer's information. And the rep on the other side of the call was like, "Oh, I didn't realize you could do that," right? And that was a massive platform. That's, if anyone who had a basic understanding of how ID numbers worked in a system was changing it, they've already got all the information. They've already iterated through it. And the amount of times that's happened, that I've seen that happen, is kind of ridiculous. Like it's the first thing I try when I'm seeing if a platform is secure for our customers, and it happens all the time. And on stuff that's scary. Yeah, so the OWASP standards, there are, I'll put the link in the chat after I'm done here, or maybe someone else can dump those in there. There's a set of standards, like it's a third-party organization that puts out like the top 10 threats, and they've got different, they've got like threats on APIs, they've got threats on web applications, they have threats on different kind of aspects of your application, but they have a really good idea of like what to look for. Things like, can you access stuff that you're not supposed to? I was mentioning that earlier, that if I just change one ID number or change an ID number in a header, I can get to another spot on the page, or I can get to a customer information that I shouldn't see. Are you implementing proper security? Are you using OAuth properly? Different things like that. But it's something that if you're working for a development team, you should absolutely look at, and then you should absolutely spend some time trying to just see if the most basic sets of those things are properly working. And like I said, I'll put some links into the Slack later on, or so I don't have to jump into here. Another thing, there's different kinds of developers. A lot of what we're seeing right now in the market is, as I kind of said earlier, there's the concept of these boot camps that are coming up, and they're producing people who are very, very focused on more front end stuff. So when I say front end, when you look at a website, if you go to Google or go to Google Maps or something, like all that code that you see on the front end that you're actually interacting with, all the stuff that when you go buy something on Amazon, you're actually interacting with on the front end. That's more of what they're focused on, and their need for security is more limited versus people who are on the back end. I do more back end coding myself. Back end is more like building the business logic out, building the access to customer data out, building the privacy settings on the customer data out. That's the kind of stuff that I work on that side. Last thing is that code isn't written in zeros and ones or assembly language. Hasn't been for a very long time. So a lot of people think that it's, very, I always still get people who think that like I'm working on zeros and ones or assembly or something like that. Coding languages have gotten a lot easier to work with, which makes them a lot easier to mess up. And they've gotten more complex in some senses. Some of the front end stuff that I've talked about before has a lot more tooling. And a lot of the attacks that are starting to emerge is happening because of those toolings. If you look into what's it called? I think they're called supply chain attacks or supply side. Can't remember the term. People are because a lot of front end developers, when they're building their code out on the front end, they'll just look for a package that does what it's supposed to do, right? So they'll just say, oh, I just need to do this one thing on the system. So they'll go online, find a package, install that package, load it into the system, and then someone can come along, and because that package just gets auto updated every single time the system is released, put something inside of the package, and then kind of take over your application or cause some harm there. And there's ways you can mitigate that threat via, even by GitHub now. But it's another thing you got to worry about is some insecurity. It really not fun because there's a lot of areas there. So what are some strategies of working with development teams if you're in security? One is implementing security code reviews. I would say that if you're working with a development team, you're going to want to pick up a little bit of coding knowledge, even if it's just a bare minimum to just understand the code that you're working with at the company you're working with. Like I said before, like coding has changed, and you're not, for a long time we haven't worked in like really complex, overly esoteric languages. So you can generally start, if you spend a little time just kind of reading through the code, you can understand what's going on. You're not going to sit down and catch things that are going to be more advanced kind of hacking type of things like, oh, we passed a binary and this kind of stuff happened. But if you're working for a web application, it is very easy to look through code and say, how are you making sure that the client is the right client in this context? How are you making sure that this employee can't access other employees' information in this context? Like even asking those questions in that security review is a big deal, or being able to read through the code and saying, I don't see you actually ever, making sure that person can't access another person's information, or I don't see you using ID numbers that are non-incremental. So basic things like that, and I think from a security team perspective, or a cybersecurity perspective, knowing a little bit of coding is helpful. Not being an expert, not being to build applications is fine, but just knowing a little bit on that side is pretty useful. And especially if you're in a smaller team, because you're gonna have to kind of wear more hats on that. Working with development to set up proper logging. So I can't tell you how many times logging has saved us from a kind of holistic view perspective on a system. The more you log, the more you know about what's going on. But you have to make sure you're logging the right stuff and you're not logging data that you shouldn't be logging, right? Because let's say you log every single time someone changes their social security number. Are you encrypting that information in your logs? Because if you're not encrypting that social security number, and someone could get your logs instead of looking at your employee data. So you got to make sure you're logging the right stuff, but then applying the right security framework to those logs also. But subsequently, if you have the correct logging information, you can set up applications and other systems to read that log information to ensure that there's no privacy or security concerns or there's no other issues, right? So if you're sitting down trying to actually go back into the system to say what's going on here, why did this happen, or what's potential threats in the future that could happen, the more information you have about how the application is working and how it's logging to you, the more information you're going to have about identifying threats and being able to back into those threats. So it's a pretty powerful tool, and it's relatively easy for developers to implement. I've seen most places not log enough, and I guess there could be a fine line where you get too chatty with your logs, but if you're building your own application out, you generally want to start with more and then filter out the noise as you need to filter out the noise versus starting with like the bare minimum of nothing, right? So knowing those critical dates or those release cycles so you can be aware of what will change, the more that you're aware of how the development team works and when they release. So for example, on my team, if you know we're doing 100 a month, 100 a week, you're probably going to want to be more engaged with the development team to say like, okay, let me just at least know what's going on here or know what the projects are so that I know what I got to check or know what's going to come out so I can be aware of, of stuff happening. On a team like ours, we're not changing our security framework every single release, but there could be things that happen that you want to check, or maybe you have like a monthly or bi-weekly review of the code with the team to know what those changes were. Create trainings and actively pen test and reviewing code to those standards. So on our team, our security team member had a training on OWASP stuff, and then actually sat down and pen tested backwards into that and did a presentation to our team showing how they broke some of those things based off those standards, which allowed us time to fix those things. But much as like I said before, a lot of team members are self-taught. They've never really had a formal training training or education in security, and yet they're responsible for doing things that are directly related to privacy and security of customers' information. So it should be one of the things that you're thinking about as a threat, right? That you got a new developer on the team, they have no idea about how secure things should be developed securely. How can I sit down and actually work with them to train them up? Not just things on like phishing, not just training them on how to do phishing, like how to prevent from phishing, but training them on understanding how information can be attacked from a side perspective, or how you don't want to put data out there that they shouldn't be, or like how do you limit the amount of data that's exposed to the front end. Implementing tools that automate application security. One term that I've heard thrown around, and this is a newer one for me, and I'm still doing a little research on it, is a RASP, or runtime application self-protection platform. That's a little bit newer. That maybe it's not newer at all, but it's something that I'm kind of doing research because I've always relied on web application firewalls. But it looks like RASPs are more kind of a little closer to the bone, watching threats far more active in real time. And those get implemented inside of the platform, inside of platforms you work on. That's something where you'd have to work with the development team to implement that platform, and then to start setting up the right logging to make sure that you're watching stuff. But it helps you identify threats like actually happening. Like, is someone trying to do SQL injection? Is someone trying to log in a bunch of times and they shouldn't be there? And then identifying clearly communicating attacks on other systems happened, and identifying ways to improve your own. So I kind of touched base on that earlier, but the more that you can look at attacks that happen in other applications, and you can then look at your own and say, am I secure from that path, the better your system's going to be, because you're first off, you're having these conversations early on. And the second thing is, there's a lot of copycat attacks out there where people are like, oh, well, that happened here, let me just try that over here. And as that kind of stuff happens, it becomes easier for people to exploit those threats. Like, once it's happened once, can I just try it over here again? And a lot of the threats that you engage with are threats that are like, the 95% of threats that we see in our system are threats that are like people just trying stuff they've got, like scanners or something. Like, they're just going to scan your website. You're going to see those scans come up every day or so. And you're like, okay, like we're protected against these things. And they're just trying to recon against our application to see if they can get in. And if you're not protected against those basic things, then they're going to find and exploit, outwards. But those basic things change all the time, right? Like, those things change weekly, monthly, sometimes more, less frequently. But you have to make sure you're tracking for those. You got to make sure you have the right tools set up on your platform to adapt to those basic things, so you don't get sidelined by those types of attacks. So those are some strategies. The last thing I just want to touch base here on, and it's kind of like more of a I'm going to go off topic here a little bit, but I wanted to touch base on a couple other things that other people touch base on, but I wanted to give some guidance and some caution on this. The the last thing I want to say is like soft skills. And why is this important working with developers, but then working inside of organizations? So organizations, when you get to a bigger size, you're not going to know everyone's name. You're not going to work with everybody. You're not going to like know who's who in the company. Like and that generally happens above about 150 employees. But in a smaller team of 50, if you're working with a team of 15, and that's the whole team, and the whole company is 80 people. Having a good set of soft skills is very important. Even in a bigger company, it's extremely important. And it's something that I think gets ignored a lot. Even when I look at a lot of educational or a lot of educations around technology, the concept of soft skills gets a little bit pushed to the background. So I wanted to kind of touch base on that for a second. And some of these are really basic, right? Like writing. It sounds crazy, but I've had people on my team who really amazing, smart people with security, know exactly how to like red team, blue team, everything, but they completely fail from the ability to actually write a sentence. And that is extremely detrimental to them because there's no way for them to actually sit down and communicate what they're learning. And they struggle with that. That's something definitely that I would say that the more that you can kind of sit down and read through your emails, make sure that people can communicate them, the better. Critical thinking skills. I think that's something that a lot of people do not really train on. But the more that you can sit down and really think critically about what's going on, either from an attack perspective or from your system perspective, the better you are at what you're doing. And I really don't have any resources for it. It's like something you kind of just sit down and you have to just think through things. But it's a pretty powerful tool. Reading, it's kind of a straightforward. Negotiation. So negotiation and vendor management kind of go hand in hand. When you think about like a smaller team, like we're not doing all of the security stuff ourselves. We have a lot of vendors that we have in place and a lot of products that we have to buy in order to actually run our system. And we're having to constantly go out and negotiate either the products, the pricing, or other stuff to get the best deal or get the right product. And I'll give you a good example. Like one of the things we're putting together right now is we're changing our SIEM, our centralized logging system. And we're looking at a bunch of different tools. And a lot of the role of like the security team on that sense is like they have to have an RFP, they have to go talk to people, they have to work with the vendors, they have to get those relationships in place. And the person that we have doing that is very good at like security stuff, but has no clue on how to do that other thing, right? And that requires a little bit of skill. It's something to kind of learn, but it's something that's very important from a soft skill perspective. And the last thing I'll just kind of touch base here is just interview skills. Like I was going to have a team member of mine talk a little bit about interview skills, but she couldn't make it today. But it's something else that the more that you practice on it, the better you're going to get at it. But it's another soft skill that I think is very valuable in finding your next job and something you should really train on. So I'm going to open it up now. I've kind of thrown a lot of stuff about development and software stuff on you. So I'm interested if you guys have any questions or things you want me to touch base on or talk about.
Alex, there's a lot of questions in the chat, and so I'm going to facilitate this so we can get to as many questions as we can. Is that okay? I'm not sure if you heard me.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I actually got
Yes.
some direct questions. So can you please address security issues using the cloud as a platform? Is your company IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS? Private, public, community, and or hybrid?
Yeah. So from our perspective, we actually have not gone from a cloud-based to a cloud-based system. It's actually for us been more of a it's actually been far less costly to run our platform ourselves. So we have like outside data centers that we put our systems out there. And when we've looked at cloud-based platforms, we've not, we found that like what we can do for $10,000, it costs $100,000 on a cloud-based platform, as an example. So it's something that we've looked at from a cost perspective, being a smaller company and smaller infrastructural needs and smaller change needs, that we haven't been able to get there. And it's something that I think that when you're looking at, I think there's a lot of value to cloud-based platform. You're really mitigating a lot of the risks out there, and a lot of the issues that you could have with, first of all, your own like firewall issues and stuff like that. But the cost factors that come on top of that are while a lot of people say it's less costly, it's when you really get down to the numbers, it's really not. It's very expensive for you to run some infrastructure pieces out there. And I apologize because that was just one part of that. So as far as cloud-based security on the SaaS, like that's very tough for me to answer, because like I can only answer it from a more of like a data center perspective, not necessarily from a from like how do you run that on Amazon or Google type of thing.
Thanks, Alex. Can you tell us about DevOpsSec?
Yeah, I mean, from a broad perspective, I guess whoever asked that question, can you ask me like what, or tell me like what kind of thing? So that's a broad, kind of a broad question, or broad, what is that?
Go ahead, Slim.
Yeah, hi. Anytime I read something about applications or how to integrate security in applications or web development, this term always comes, DevSecOps, SecDevOps. So I want to know what is it, and is it really used or no?
Good question. And you know, honestly, like the concept of DevSecOps is that combination of phrasing is new to me, but there's always a new acronym made every freaking week. So sometimes I hear there's a new platform that's come out or something new on the road. But if you look at DevOps, you're looking at like a lot of those traditional IT, a lot of traditional like things that IT would do, like setting up VMs, setting up containers, that kind of stuff. That's being pushed a lot more to developers in a lot of companies, where developers are becoming more responsible for actually setting up their own VMs and setting up their own systems and deploying their own systems out there. On our team, we actually have a person who's more responsible for that on our team, where we just say, okay, like if we need a VM, we just ask them. And that's mainly because like we don't have the need as some of the other big companies on that side. But the DevOps term has been like, it's been used as a way to kind of start pushing a lot more of that responsibility to the developers. There's whole positions that are DevOps now that, to me, then this is just my pure personal opinion, feel more like reintegrating like that more traditional IT person back into the role, of saying like, okay, we need someone to manage all these containers and virtual machines and stuff like that we have to now manage, that we now have and out there. Yeah, DevOps stands for developer operations, and you know, a lot of that's come about because of containers and things like that. So I don't specifically know DevSecOps. I don't know. I'd have to look into that a little bit and give you more feedback. But you know, I can guess what it is, but I've never actually encountered that as a term or a process.
Thanks, Alex. A lot of folks are asking, what are the top languages you're using for backend, front end, and everything in between?
Good question. So if you look online for like the top languages, I think it's like Java, SQL. It's either C++ or Python that comes next, and then JavaScript, which is crazy. So, and it just depends, right? So it depends on the size of the company you're going to and what they do. I would say that if I was going to sit down and learn a language today, knowing in the security realm, knowing Python is very valuable, because there's a lot of tools out there that are, or a lot of tools or information out there that's just very Python based. Python, just in my day-to-day, I use Python a lot when I'm dealing with logs. So if I want to really quickly understand and read through a log, using Python to parse that log is extremely valuable, because it just like, it just is fast. It's just a fast language to write things in, like very quick little scripts on. The main ones that we use on our team are SQL, PHP, C#, and JavaScript. JavaScript is probably the most prevalent, thing you interact with in the world. If you open up any website, it's using JavaScript today. Like the majority of them are, like in some way or another, they're using JavaScript. From a pure security perspective, is learning JavaScript the most valuable thing? Probably not, unless you really want to be a developer. But it is like probably the most prevalent language out there. Even though like when you look at the top needed languages, like JavaScript's like number 4 or 5. It's the number 1 thing that you interact with day to day on that side.
Thanks, Alex. I'm not sure if you already answered this, but how bad would a situation need to get for you to make major changes in your cybersecurity framework?
And then what was the last thing? Cybersecurity
Framework?
in the framework. How bad would it have to get? I mean, we keep it pretty, we try to say pretty proactive. If it got really bad, I mean, how bad would it have to get? I mean, that's a tough question. I mean, and I'm trying to think of like what we would do differently on that side, because we're constantly adding new tools or new features or new ideas onto our cybersecurity platform and our methodologies. It would probably take like, I don't know if any of you guys have heard about this, but like there was an executive order that was signed a couple weeks ago, and there's a lot of things on that we're still trying to understand how it's going to affect us. I said earlier before we work with prevailing wage, we work contractors. Prevailing wage stuff is all federal government, federal laws and stuff. And one of our new platforms, it's actually starting to get a little bit more like we have like the Army is in our system now. And now that the Army's in our system, and now that the executive order changed, or this executive order is signed, we're just kind of waiting to see like what's the Army going to say to us and what are they going to require from us. And a lot of times it's not necessarily, and this is kind of, sometimes eye-opening. A lot of times it's not a hacker who's going to come into your system and break things and make you change your stuff. It's the legislation and the rules and the places that you do business that are going to make you change your things, and make you upgrade your security. And sometimes that security is actually valuable. Sometimes that security is leader. A lot of the stuff that when we deal with vendors, they're asking us for information that, show us these policies and procedures that you have written down. And it's like policies and procedures don't change anything. Like as an example, Google came to us and said, we need you to update your privacy policy to add this phrase into your thing. They didn't say, we need you to change your process. They said, we need you to change your policy so we can cover our own ass when we get, if someone calls us and tells us you have a problem. So a lot of the times you're changing it based off those third-party demands, not necessarily because someone breaks into your system and does something. It's legal or business requirements that do it.
Thanks, Alex. It is easier to learn something you enjoy. What would you recommend to make learning a language easier and enjoyable to someone that doesn't have any background in it?
That's a great question. And honestly, if it's either for security or programming, it's coming up with a project you really love and doing it. A lot of times, if you get a book on Python or something like that, it's really tedious to get through because there's no application, right? You don't have anything to apply that to in your real life. And what I always tell people who are getting into the field or getting and learning is you have to have a project that you're working on. It's either a pet project or something you see at work. You have a bunch of logs at work that you want to scrape through. And it's just like right now, like that's a great time to sit down and figure out how you can scrape through that information on Python. If you're working on if you want to have a small interface for yourself to aggregate data or something like that, that's great. That's a great place to start working through that information through a programming language. So having a project, I think, is the best thing. Even on security, having a project is the best starting point for yourself to learn those things.
Thanks, Alex. I'm not sure if you already answered this, but in Azure development, what happens if a product can't be developed in the allotted time? Does the scope of the project change or is the time extended?
That's a great question. That's very dependent on the company, and no products are ever on time. So it's like even though you can say it's going to be 4 weeks to get this thing out, that's always takes longer because there's always stuff in the middle that happens. So usually on most companies they extend it a little bit because if you look up like estimates, like product development estimates, like everyone's always off because no one's ever estimating properly. And then there's always something that comes up along the way. So really, it depends on the management team. On my team, like if we go over, we go over and we try to keep it to a small time, but it doesn't, it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't hurt anybody to go a little bit over on that stuff.
How open are teams and companies about reporting attacks on their own system so that others can use that info to protect their own?
So I said earlier we're a small team, like 80 people, but a lot of that is about awareness. How aware are your users of knowing what's an attack and actually reporting to you, right? I would like to say that everyone's really aware and like will report to you, but that's also where you need to sit down and really like aggressively have that conversation with people. Like if you see something weird, call me immediately, right? Because I've had situations on my own staff, not development team members, but like other team members who have come in and said, or not development, but like operations staff, like, hey, I clicked on this link like 4 hours ago. Should I have done something with that? Like, yeah, we should probably take a look at that right now, right? And it's really, to me, it's more about awareness than anything else there. So it happens more commonly than you think. Like, no matter how much training you do, you got to have the tools in place to make sure you know that those threats are happening. And you got to train people and know that those threats happen.
Can you talk about specific logging or reporting tools? How does someone know what are the right logs?
Good question. So some of the logging tools, a lot of times when you're looking at like application layer stuff, a lot of that logging is going to have to be set up by the development team. So you're going to have to work with them, or they're going to have to kind of put that together to log that information in the right spot for you. Since we utilize SQL here, it's easy for us to kind of dump things in a more common spot or put things in the right text files so that the security and IT staff can read through those logs and put them into our SIM. But having what's called a SIM is really valuable. If you look out there, I think the more prominent one on the market is called Splunk. There's also like SolarWinds has one. There's a bunch of other ones out there. But having one of those tools in place is extremely valuable to aggregate that information and find reports. Oh, cool. I have some from Splunk.
Yeah, they're doing a panel during the CompTIA one. I had a question. Oh, can you talk about OAuth? Where they can get some more information at OAuth? Is it www.oauth.org?
Oh yeah. So OAuth. So there's like when I said OAuth earlier, there's like the OAuth. There's like a platform out there called Auth0 or something, I think. But like OAuth is like this, like it's complicated to explain it, and I will put some resources. I'll put some resources out there for everybody to kind of research it. But it's like it's a way for computer systems to communicate to each other for security and for kind of login purposes. From our side, anytime that we're working with like a third-party vendor, like not every time, but a lot of times we're working with them, they'll utilize like OAuth, which is just a way to pass tokens back and forth to understand each other. So I'll put some more notes. I'll find a better link for it to explain it better. Like it's relatively complex in its implementation, and it's hard for me to explain it right now. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, and there's a resources tab in the Slack if you want to add it there for everyone. Is it true that once you understand the syntax of one language, it's easy to transition to a different language?
It depends on the language, for sure. Like I know that I worked a little bit on our C# stuff on our platform, and jumping from C# to Java for me was very easy to do. Jumping from C# to PHP or PHP to C# was pretty easy. Going into Python though was a little bit of a jump because of how the syntax is formatted. And then there are some languages like SQL, where SQL's like some days I have like JavaScript, PHP, C# and SQL up at the same time trying to debug something. And when you get into the SQL realm, you have to put your mindset in a totally different realm because it's written in a way that's way different. Although it's easier for people to understand because it's more semantic, it's definitely a little harder to kind of tune your brain to a little bit. But so it depends. The answer on that is it depends on that side.
Does your company have a plan in case the client's data becomes compromised to help the client?
Yes. I don't want to elaborate on too much, but yes, yes. There's like we hold a lot of data on the employees, so yes, we have to have something in place for that, and insurance and all that other fun stuff. Which is another thing that on a small company, like you wouldn't think that insurance is something that's the realm of security, but you have to be involved in that conversation and involved in that in making sure you have the right insurance and stuff like that on there too. So. It is something that we have to get involved with and help out with auditors and stuff.
So we have 4 minutes left. I have a question for you, Alex. What are some tools for folks to learn about coding and software development? I know in our meetings we talked about GitHub. I know a lot of developers use Stack Overflow. Are there any other tools, like online tools, to help them research and ask questions to the larger community?
I think understanding GitHub is like if you're looking at integrating with the development team, learning what GitHub is and what GitHub has to offer, or GitLab, which is another kind of popular tool out there. The reason why like knowing how GitHub works is important is because there's a lot of integrated security tools. Like GitHub released something that actually when I talked about the supply side attacks or supply chain attacks earlier, GitHub actually has a thing in there that looks at your packages that you have installed and gives you security updates and says, here's a security threat that's happening. And it won't necessarily do the work for you, but it will tell you that there's a problem and that you need to fix that. Stack Overflow is good if you want to do research on. If you want to learn, it depends on the language you want to learn. But like I find FreeCodeCamp to be a really good resource for that. I've had a lot of developers I've hired start with FreeCodeCamp, and it's been very helpful for them. And I think there's one called DataCamp, if I'm not mistaken. That is a really good one that some of our team members use to learn how to understand and read data and actually parse through that data. So it's another one that's worth, I think it's called DataCamp, if I'm not mistaken. It's another one that's worth looking at.
Yeah, I've actually heard about Free Code Camp. A lot of folks get jobs through that program, and it's free. My last question for you too is, you are self-taught developer. When you got your first job in tech, did you have to have a degree, or how did you get into tech being self-taught?
Great question. So let me start with the degree stuff. Like when I hire people today, I don't care what degree you have. I've never looked at that as a major plus, but that's also because I'm a person who's got a business background in development, right? On my team, I have one person on my staff that has a computer science background. Everybody else is like all over the place. One of my developers has a master's in journalism. So I don't find it to be necessarily like a requirement to get a job. And I think in our fields, security and development, like it's more about how you work and how you work and how you learn than what you've gone to school for. So I'll start with that. As far as myself, like I went out of school, I was recruited by eBacon, or what was TAG at the time, to actually do like health insurance quoting. And like work on our marketing side.
We lost you, Alex. Alex, we can't hear you if you can hear us.
Sorry,
There
can
you
you
are.
guys hear me?
Yep.
Sorry
Yes.
about that. Like for some reason, it's like been going in and out on here a lot lately. So, sorry, got a kid in the background here now too. So I apologize. She's like, what's going on over here? Why are you on the phone? So anyway, I started working at this company, and I saw an opportunity to start building out some of the platform. So I built out, I helped start building out the platform, but it's something I had been kind of just working on my side time, and kind of fell more into the development role than anything else here. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Alex, for presenting. We're really grateful for your time. Some of the folks asked if you can share your presentation so that they can refer back to.
Sorry, I could not hear you there. My headset's been going in and out.
Would you be able to share the presentation so some of the folks can refer back to?
Yep, absolutely. I'll put that. I'll send that into. Do you want to send to you, or do you want to put it into the Slack
Go
channel?
ahead, send it to me, Alex, because I'm going to
Okay.
make a whole thing for it. But thank you again. If anyone wants to unmute and say thank you, please do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Awesome. Alex, you're more than welcome to stay on, but feel free to jump off. Our next session is Mohammed,